Democratic Whip.
Mr. President, yesterday I met with Kash Patel, President Trump's nominee to serve as director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We all know the FBI. It plays a critical role in keeping America safe from terrorism, violent crime, and other threats. The person who is in charge of our nation's leading law enforcement organization, the FBI, should be someone who is nonpartisan, solid, reliable, with a demonstrated skill in law enforcement. We were reminded of this on 9/11, that the FBI is the leading agency that we in America rely on to keep us safe. The 30,000 professionals at the FBI have the skills and resources to do the job. They deserve a leader who understands the gravity of their mission. After meeting with Kash Patel, I have grave concerns about his fitness for the role of FBI director. Mr. Patel has neither the experience, the temperament, or the judgment to lead the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He is a staunch political loyalist who has repeatedly peddled false conspiracy theories and threatened to retaliate against those who have slighted him personally and politically. Start with January 6th. I was here in the Senate that day. I'll always be grateful to the U.S. Capitol Police and D.C. police officers who defended everyone who works in this building from an angry mob that is egged on by President Trump. You've seen the videos. You know what I'm talking about. But Kash Patel, the man who claims he should lead the FBI, actually says, and I quote, the FBI was planning January 6th for a year. Planning January 6th, the FBI. And he posted on social media, and I quote, January 6th, never an insurrection. Then he said, cowards in uniform exposed. Let me say those words again. Cowards in uniform. That's what Mr. Patel said. I asked him about that statement in my office yesterday. He couldn't explain it. Who were these so-called cowards in uniform when the mob stormed the Capitol building on January 6th? Who were these people? Were they the Capitol Hill police and the DC police officers who literally risked their lives to protect us and the vice president? In light of the deaths and serious injuries they faced, Mr. Patel should not even suggest the possibility that these were cowardly acts. These were acts of bravery and courage. Many of them risked their lives for us, as they do every single day. To the people who've gathered in the balcony here to observe the Senate in session, to the thousands of visitors to this building, look around you. Quietly standing guard are men and women in uniform, Capitol Hill police, who are ready to step in and protect you if necessary. On January 6th, they did it at a great cost. So what are Mr. Patel's plans for this FBI that he said was actually planning January 6th? He said he wants to, quote, shut down the FBI Hoover building on day one and reopen it the next day as a museum of the deep state. And he said, quote, we're going to come after the people in the media. We're going to come after you, whether it's criminally or civilly. We're putting you all on notice. This is the man who wants to head up the FBI, and I'm quoting exactly what he said. He's even published an enemies list of 60 people whom he calls government gangsters. It's in writing. The playbook is there. The list of all 60 names is spelled out in detail. Who is included on this list of people that would be his enemies, these so-called government gangsters? Well, members of both political parties, Mr. Patel has identified, including former Trump administration officials like Defense Secretary Esper. Then there's Bob Mueller. Bob Mueller is an extraordinary man and a patriot, a Republican, who has been called on repeatedly to serve this country and has done so willingly. He enlisted in the Marine Corps out of college. When one of his dear friends was killed in Vietnam, he decided he had to serve and had to fight too. He served in the U.S. Marine Corps as a lieutenant, received the Bronze Star and the Purple Heart. Even after he was injured and received the Purple Heart, he returned to battle. He's an extraordinary person. I came to know him a few days after 9/11, when I reached out to see if there was anything I could do to help the FBI and its new leader, Mr. Mueller. We struck up a friendship and a relationship over the years. I respected him so much. What does Mr. Kash Patel think of Bob Mueller, this man who served our country in so many different ways? He calls him an utter swamp creature. And then there's Paul Ryan, former congressman from the state of Wisconsin, former Republican Speaker of the House. I count him as a friend, not a close friend, but a casual friend, someone I like. We didn't have a lot in common when it came to politics, but I thought he was a good public servant, served our country well. What does Kash Patel, who wants to head up the FBI, say in his book in writing about Paul Ryan? Total failure and a coward. Paul Ryan, total failure and a coward. And then there's General Mark Milley, who was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He served our country in so many different capacities, led our troops in battle, and distinguished himself time and time again. What does Kash Patel say of General Mark Milley, who served in President Trump's leadership? He calls him the Kraken of the swamp. The Kraken of the swamp. Does this sound like the resume of a person who should lead the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the world's preeminent criminal investigation agency? And I asked him a practical question as well. There are 30,000 people in law enforcement in the FBI. What do you think is the morale of that group after President Trump's pardons the other night of the people who were involved in the January 6th violence? Well, Mr. Patel went on to tell me that he didn't in any way approve of violence against law enforcement officers. And I asked him, will you say that publicly, that you don't think they should have been pardoned if they were guilty of violence against police officers? He said he would have to take it up the chain of command. Let me say for a moment, we should reflect on these pardons and the people who receive them. I want to make sure that I put these details in the record without any question of their veracity. Some of the people convicted of violence on January 6th here in the U.S. Capitol building who received full, complete, and unconditional pardons from President Trump the day he was sworn in. David Dempsey, convicted of repeatedly assaulting police officers with pepper spray, a metal crutch, and wooden and metal poles. Quote, for over 1 hour, defendant David Dempsey viciously assaulted and injured police officers, end of quote. Federal prosecutors charged. Metropolitan Police Department Detective Nguyen testified that after Dempsey pepper sprayed him, he was knocked down and, quote, I thought that's, where I'm going to die. And in my head, I'm thinking about my family at that point before anything else. Dempsey was sentenced to 20 years in prison and received a full, complete, and unconditional pardon from President Trump Monday night. Julian Cater pleaded guilty to pepper spraying the Capitol Hill police officer Brian Sicknick in the face. Later that night, Sicknick collapsed and was rushed to the hospital. He died the following day. According to Washington, D.C. medical examiner, Sicknick's death was due to, quote, natural causes, close quote, 2 strokes. But, quote, all that transpired played a role in his condition. Sicknick's mother, Gladys, spoke at Cater's sentencing hearing. Quote, lawlessness, misplaced loyalty to a deranged autocratic ideal, and hate killed my son, she said. And I hope you are haunted by your crimes behind bars, she said to Julian Cater. Whatever jail time you receive is not enough in my eyes. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison and received a full, complete, and unconditional pardon Monday night. Christian Matthew Manley pleaded guilty to assaulting police with 2 cans of bear spray and throwing empty canisters at officers. Manley then threw a metal rod at officers. Federal Judge Tanya Chutkan told Manley at a sentencing hearing that, quote, there has to be an understanding that participating, taking up arms against law enforcement, taking up arms to basically try and overthrow the government is going to be met with severe punishment. Manley was sentenced to more than 4 years in prison. He received a full, complete, and unconditional pardon from Donald Trump Monday night. Patrick Edward McGahee III was convicted of using a police riot shield to crush Metropolitan Police Officer Daniel Hodges in a metal door frame, leaving Hodges trapped, bleeding and crying for help from his fellow officers. Quote, "If I was there much longer being assaulted in such a way, I knew it was very likely I wouldn't be able to maintain consciousness," Hodges testified. Quote, "Your actions on January 6th were some of the most egregious crimes that were committed that day," federal judge Trevor McFadden told McGahee before sentencing him to 7 years in prison. Mr. McGahee received a full, complete, and unconditional pardon from Donald Trump on Monday. Ryan Nichols pleaded guilty to pepper spraying police officers and urging rioters through a bullhorn to storm the building. Quote, "This is not a peaceful protest," he yelled, according to prosecutors. "If you have a weapon, you need to get your weapon." Later that night, Nichols recorded a video of himself calling for a second American Revolution and stating, quote, "If you want to know where Ryan Nichols stands for violence." Nichols was sentenced to more than 5 years in prison and received a full, complete, and unconditional pardon from the president Monday night. Christopher Quaylen was convicted at trial of, quote, "viciously assaulting police officers for hours," according to federal prosecutors. Quote, "On at least a dozen occasions, Quaylen stood face to face with officers as he screamed at them, pushed with outstretched arms, punched, swatted, and slapped them, pushed bike racks into officers, and even choked one officer to the ground," prosecutors stated. Quaylen was sentenced to 12 years in prison, received a full, unconditional, and complete pardon from Donald Trump on Monday night. Daniel Rodriguez pleaded guilty to using a stun gun and plunging it multiple times into police officer Michael Fanone's neck, in the words of prosecutors, leading Fanone to scream out in pain. Quote, "During those moments, I remember thinking there was a very good chance that I would be torn apart or shot to death with my own weapon," Fanone testified to Congress. Rodriguez was sentenced to more than 12 years in prison. Daniel Rodriguez received a full, complete, and unconditional pardon from Donald Trump. Peter Schwartz, convicted of stealing pepper spray from police officers, distributing the canisters to other rioters, and indiscriminately spraying law enforcement, according to prosecutors. Court documents from the Justice Department described him as, quote, "a welder by trade and a felon who has racked up numerous convictions for drugs, weapons, and violence over the last 3 decades. The day after the riot, he allegedly posted on Facebook, "What happened yesterday was the opening of a war." He's referring to January 6th. "I was there, and whether people will acknowledge it or not, we are now at war." Schwartz was sentenced to more than 14 years in prison. He received a full, unconditional, and complete pardon by the president on Monday night. These are the instances that I wanted to highlight. For those who suggest that these are just casual tourists to the Capitol, they should read the details of the attacks these individuals made on police officers who stood to guard us, the Vice President, and any visitors to the Capitol that day. They risked their lives for us, and the pardons from the White House are impossible to explain under those circumstances. I raised those with Kash Patel. I said, "You want to be the head of the largest federal law enforcement agency, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. What do you think those pardons are doing to the morale of police officers across the country?" He said he did not condone violence against police officers. I want to make sure I make that clear for the record. So I said, "Will you say anything publicly about that?" He said, "I have to take it up the chain of command before I would say anything publicly." In 1976, Congress passed a law limiting the FBI director to a single term of 10 years, intending to insulate this position from political influence. But President Trump has repeatedly tried to bend the FBI director to his political agenda. He fired his first FBI director, Jim Comey. He forced out his second FBI director, Chris Wray, when they refused to do his bidding. Now President Trump has nominated a proven loyalist in Kash Patel. In a 2019 meeting, Patel reportedly told President Trump in the Oval Office he wanted to expand his portfolio to ensure White House personnel were, quote, "completely loyal to the administration." Loyalty of police officers on a political basis is not the basis for sound judgment when it comes to law enforcement. We find loyal police forces in countries with autocratic rulers throughout our history. We don't want that in the United States. Mr. Patel's political grievances make him a favorite of the MAGA world, but they have not prepared him to work night and day to keep America safe from violent crime, drug trafficking, terrorism, and other threats. Mr. Patel's endless list of political grievances and well-documented threats of retribution are disqualifying, and they are spelled out in graphic detail in his own book, which I have read. The FBI is a critical agency in keeping America safe. Mr. Patel is not the person for this life and death assignment. Mr. President, I yield the floor. Suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsop Brooks.